In this video, I'm going to tell you the story of why and how I closed my professional Aikido school after running it for 7 years. If you're interested, stay tuned. Hey, critical thinkers of martial arts, grab a cup of coffee, sit down next to me on this bench. I'm going to have to lay something for you because it's a bit wet. And today, as I said, I'm going to tell you the story of how I closed my Aikido Dojo. I did it a few years ago, and it was a life-changing experience. It's one of the best things I actually did, but it wasn't for financial reasons. It wasn't like because, I had a hard time or I failed running a successful business. It was a successful school. I had hundreds of students. Like at certain periods, I had over 150 students enrolled simultaneously. I was making a living from it, and I was doing a good job. It wasn't always easy. There's a lot of lessons I had to learn. It's funny because it's crazy because I opened it up when I was 22. And at that day, it was funny because people would come to my dojo and they would tell me like, oh, you're only 22 and you're already like doing this thing. And apparently, they liked what I taught and they were surprised. And I thought at that day, I knew, Jon Snow, nothing. I knew little about life and the world, and I thought it's normal. And I was like, why are these people surprised? But then now I look back, I meet some 22-year-old, guys and women, and I'm like, what? At your age, I was already running a professional Aikido school? That's mental, that's mad. And now I can see why people were so surprised. But again, at that moment, it seemed natural to me. And again, as I said, like I worked my ass off and I was doing a good job. For the first 2 years, I loved it. I had a dream to open my Aikido school for 8 years. I was working my ass off towards it already when I was in high school. I was reading like endlessly books about Aikido, and I was doing extra training, and I was going out of my way to meet Aikido instructors, and I would talk to them for like hours upon hours. Like I did everything I could. I eventually became an Aikido full-time live-in student. I lived in an Aikido school for 3 years, and I learned like hell. And eventually I was given the permission and the blessing to open my school. And so I did. And from the very get-go, it was successful. I usually like to tell the story that there's this crazy moment where I was choosing between two spaces. There was this kind of a small space in the city center of where I opened my school. And I was so ambitious. I was dead certain I will open a school which is going to be packed with 100 people. And I was like, 100 people don't fit here. My vision doesn't fit in this space. And the renters were like, oh, we have another space. And they showed me another one, like 500 square meters. Here are the numbers in American. And it was like a huge space. It was like huge. It was way too big for me at the city center, second floor. And I was like, I can see 100 people here. And so I convinced, I decided to take that space. And my parents were in the beginning, they were helping me out to kind of, get things going. My dad is really good at construction, so we were building stuff and everything together. But then they saw the space. I convinced them. My conviction was so deep that they were like, okay, let's do this. Let's take the space. And as soon as we wrote the signature, they were like, it's a mistake. Why did we take this space? And I was like, wait. Hold your horses. Stop. We decided to do it. That means we're going to do it. There's no way out. It's forward or nothing. And that's what I did. And I pushed for things, I promoted myself, and I was really enthusiastic and energetic. And I think that people picked it up, and I was also good at it. I devoted so much time to become a good instructor that people loved it. And from the very first month, I was already able to sustain myself financially. But now, obviously, we're talking about the videos about me closing the dojo. So things started to go down eventually. And initially, I think the significant part, which probably I didn't put on record so many times. The first year was awesome. Everyone was super hyped and pumped. But then after like about a year, I started to see problems. And I won't go into too much detail of what was happening, but I started seeing the problems in the community and kind of internal conflicts between students and me and some conflicts I had with my student, even myself. Well, it was mainly like just internal conflicts between various people. And what struck me was that those conflicts were the exact same conflict that I noticed in the Aikido school that I lived for 3 years in. And I always thought that, it's a human thing. But then I started to question what's happening, and I started to realize that was actually a lot of the conflicts were happening because of how the structure of the dojo was, of how I positioned myself as a sensei, as a spiritual martial arts teacher, kind of a know-it-all. And I did it because I thought it's like the way to go. I was copying my teacher. And I realized that already led to so many problems. And the hierarchy system, there was just a bunch of things which were creating a ground for internal conflicts, for conflicts between people. And the same happened in the dojo where I used to live in, and the same started happening in me. And I realized, it's actually, that's my bad. I'm facilitating this bad environment. So I started to change what was happening. I started to question things. And I think that's probably one of the first things where I started to really work on critical thinking. Yay, critical thinking, hooray. I started to see problems in how the dojo was run and what I was teaching. And again, it's a long story, but basically it was a hard moment because I lost most of my students through that process because they dug the version of me being the spiritual teacher and telling you, the meaning of life and everything. And once I started to tone things down and become more human, more casual, they didn't like it that much. And again, it's a whole story. I actually did speak about that in a video, why most of my Aikido students abandoned me, so you can check it out. Here or there, you're gonna see like a pop-up line, so click on it. But coming closer to the closing of the dojo, that wasn't like the main thing which led me to it, but that started me off on a questioning process where I started to see other problems with Aikido. And I also was starting to run my YouTube channel. Initially the martial arts journey used to be called Aikido Shoulei. It's a weird name, local city where I was teaching Aikido plus Aikido. But I was doing tutorials. I was doing Aikido tutorials, and I was really successful at it. I became like a world famous Aikidoka. But then I did the Aikido versus MMA video, which most of you know about. I got asked by an MMA person that led me to question Aikido even more. The thing about being famous in the Aikido world, they started to hate me, and I started to lose. Before I got invitations to teach internationally, suddenly I didn't get any anymore. So that was something too. But focusing on the dojo itself, I think the main thing which started to happen is I started to see that there were a lot of things I was told about Aikido, but when I questioned it and when I pressure tested it, so I was told that, this is true in Aikido, but I would test it and it wouldn't seem to work, it wouldn't work out, and I would learn that other people did the same and went through the same experience and came to the same conclusion. And I started to also bring that up to my Aikido instructor, and he didn't necessarily agree with me, or he didn't agree with me. And I also started to question my Aikido instructor, and I started to see that there was a lot of hypocrisy. Like, he was telling about a bunch of things, but he wasn't really doing them. So I don't want to go too deep into that because he hates my guts, and he sometimes reaches out to me and complains to me about me sharing those stories about him. So I don't say his name, I don't point fingers at him, but those stories are important to share in my experience. And eventually, actually, I even had to block him on Facebook because he just kept bugging me. But thing is, there's one story I do want to share with you so you have an example. So he was teaching about, because Aikido is kind of a way of peace and conflict resolution, yada, yada. He was teaching to me and other students, like, you have to really engage in, and even if the conversation is difficult, and you have to work through problems and transform conflicts, yada, yada. And then one time, when I was really cool, I was calm, and I was just kind of posing questions. I was like, well, look, there's some incongruences that I see. You say this, and then I tested in Aikido, and this didn't work out, and then you said this, and then you did this. And I just pointed out some flaws, and a number of times he got so frustrated in that talk, his face just turned red, and he turned his back, and he walked away from the conversation. And I was just left standing there. I was like, whoa. It was like kindergarten level. But okay, everyone is a human, anyone can do that, no one is perfect. But he was positioning himself as a spiritual teacher, like a teacher, grandmaster of conflict resolution expert. He was teaching that all over the place. He was teaching me that, everyone. And then he does that. So it's like, so moments like that, and I could make a whole list. I could write a book about incongruences in his teachings. But moments like that, I was just like, wait, something is off. This dude, whatever he's teaching me, he's not necessarily a great representation of that. The same way I picked that bad habit of him as well, and that didn't work out to me. And then also there was the point of me trying to kind of copy the model of his way of running the dojo, and experiencing some bad stuff for it as a result. Some decisions he was making were bad. The same bad decisions led me to the same bad results. So those 2 points were already like in my mind. I was like, fuck, I'm doing this weird thing with this dojo, and I questioned it, and I changed it, and I transformed it. By the end of running my Aikido school, I was very honest about things, and I told to my students, I told to new people who would come in, I would tell them, look, Aikido is not a great way for self-defense. This is more like a personal practice, like a spiritual practice. So, I wasn't tricking anyone. I was casual, and people loved it. I had still a great group of people. I still have a great connection and a great relationship with the people who were my last group as I closed my dojo. But the more I questioned it, the more I started to feel like an imposter. I felt like I'm tricking people. I was teaching Aikido, especially at the very last year, and I was like, this doesn't make sense, and this doesn't make sense, and this doesn't make sense, like especially in the self-defense aspect, but even like in the spiritual aspect. So many things which were taught to me and I taught it forward were proved to be nonsense. There was no scientific evidence based on those claims. There was no proof. And the more I questioned, the less I could teach, that I could believe in. And the last straw in that whole narrative was a significant moment was when I was talking to Matt Thornton, the founder of Straight Blast Gym International, a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, one of the first MMA teachers in the world, I'd say. And we're in great relationship now, but it was still just the beginning of us getting to know. It was actually the very first talk. And he went through a similar process with Jeet Kune Do. Back in the day, he questioned Jeet Kune Do, and same way he was, he was made into an outcast. They hated him and they talked bad about him, and then in that process, he decided he cannot teach Jeet Kune Do. He basically just went to MMA, even before MMA really existed, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu too. So that happened to him. A similar process happened to him like 30 years ago, like 25 years ago. So he knew exactly what I was going through, and that talk, I still consider that to be one of the best talks I had in my life, because all the answers, all the questions I had, all the problems I had, he exactly knew what I'm talking about. He gave the perfect answers for me. And the final question I believe I asked him was, I said, what's your advice? And that's a question I posed to many people, to many different experts that I was interviewing for my Aikido versus MMA journey. And I asked him, what's your advice for me as an Aikidoka? Like what should I do to improve my Aikido or whatever? Like, what's your advice? And usually people tell me like, oh, improve this technique or do some boxing, do some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Matt was like, I think you should quit doing Aikido. And it wasn't like, imposing it on me. He just was sharing his thoughts. It's like, I was caught off guard. I was like, whoa, okay, yeah, okay, well, please tell me more. And he told me, well, life is short and you don't have all the time in the world. And the more time you will waste doing something which barely works, you can invest, the sooner you start investing time into something which absolutely works, the quicker you will learn it. And it makes so much sense to me. For years, I was living by the idea of what would I do if I would have 1 year to live? That's like a big question in my life. At least used to be, and just became a habit. The lack of time and the fragility of life was a big subject already, and a close subject to my heart already. And so when he suggested that to me, I realized he's right. He's totally right. And that didn't lead me right away to that decision to close the dojo. But then after about a month or so, I was teaching yet another class, and I was just like hating my guts for doing it. My students loved it, but I felt like this is wrong. I'm teaching stuff which doesn't make sense. And I just felt so bad that after a Friday night class, I didn't go directly home. I went to the lake. I sat down. I was like, just like it's something is off. Like I have to make a decision. I have to change something. And I sat down and asked myself, so what should I do? What should I do in this situation so I wouldn't be fooling myself and others anymore? And I realized, you know what? The answer is I should close my dojo. And it was such a radical decision. It's such a big choice because it was my main source of income. I did not have a plan B. I did not have a clear plan of action of what I'm going to do next. YouTube was picking up, and I had the faith that I could survive through YouTube if I will put in more work, and I will have more capacity to put in more work because I will not be running this dojo, this big thing anymore. But the clarity was so clear to me. I saw that, I closing the dojo makes most sense. And that same moment, that same day, I decided that's it. The next day I met my students and told them, we're done. I'm closing the dojo. And I didn't speak about that. I didn't give any hints about that. And that was my bad. That was my mistake. They were shocked. There were tears, and they were like, holy crap, like what the heck are you talking about? And then I realized, oh, this is actually bigger than I thought. I thought I should have taken it, I should have introduced that differently and gradually. I thought that people were doubtful about what I do as much as I was, and I was expecting that I will tell them, you know what, I should close the dojo, and they will be like, oh yeah, I think you should, like, we like it, but it's stupid. That was not the case, and that was that led me to another story of reconciling that and trying to help them to start their own Aikido club. And so that's the downside, which I had to face, and I still went through my decision and closed the dojo like in a matter of month. Eventually, that's when I moved to Portland and did the Wim to Warrior, did my MMA fight. And it's great, if I wouldn't have closed the dojo, all of these beautiful things wouldn't have happened. But yeah, basically that's how the story went. And if you're interested to see more stories like that, click here on this playlist. It's actually my new channel called Critical Thinkers, where I explore how critical thinking can be applied in various fields of life. And there's similar stories like that in that channel, so just check it out. And let me know what you think about the story in the comments. Now you know the full story of what and how happened.